I keep hearing about how awesome these Arrtx acrylic markers are. So today I am swatching all of them, and then I'm going to put them to a few rigorous mixed media tests to see how they stand up against other art markers that I use frequently, like Pitt pens and Posca pens. Before I dive into swatching and actually putting these to the test, I'm just going to go over super quick the anatomy of this marker and how it differs from other markers that you might see frequently used in mixed media. The Arrtx marker has a really lovely, perfectly squishy nib, and it comes to a nice point. I actually really enjoy working with these. It's an incredibly smooth coloring and writing experience, so I'm loving that. I also love the thickness. They could be a little bit thicker, but I feel like I don't want something super bulky all the time in comparison to, say, the Pitt pen, which has been around for a long time, actually has a really similar feel. And the nib is also similar in that it ends in a really nice point, because not all paint markers do. It's a little thicker, but the ink is quite different. That's inside, although I didn't realize that until after I really put it to the test. So there are some similarities, which I will show you in the full demo, and how they can be used similarly to Pitt pens, but then there's a key difference that makes them quite different. Another thing I like about them in terms of the barrel and the design is that you don't have to shake them. So Posca pens are probably the most quote unquote famous markers that you can work with, and when it comes to mixed media work, and it's always tricky to get the ink flowing. You have to constantly shake it. You have to worry about when you depress the nib that there it goes, the acrylic ink inside is going to smear and pool like it just did all the time. So you don't have any of those worries when you're working with this marker. That's like a huge plus. Also, here is a new paint marker that Sharpie came out with. I feel like everyone is always trying to up their marker game and compete with one another, which of course that's how all brands do it as well. But as you can see, this one by Sharpie, while the ink is probably exactly the same, the nib is quite different. It doesn't come to that lovely tip the same way that the Arrtx marker does, as you can see here. See how blunt that is? And that is a downside for me, because a lot of my work I do is actually pretty precise. And the reason why I'm choosing markers over a paintbrush and paint is for this exact reason. It's convenient. The line stroke is consistent. You don't have to keep going back. You don't have drips and drabs. So I want a nice point. So that is another huge plus for Arrtx in my book. Anyways, these sharpers you also don't have to shake to get working, but again, the downside is you have that kind of blunt nib, which is less than desirable. So let's go put these to the actual test so you can see how they're going to work when you're doing real mixed media projects. As I'm laying down these swatches, and I'm going to be starting with skin tones first because that's my favorite thing to draw and to paint, let's chat about something that doesn't always get as much attention as nibs and barrels, and that is the actual ink performance. First up, the Arrtx Acrylic Marker, which is the 90 colors that I'm swatching now. Since it's acrylic based, you're essentially working with a paint pen here. That means you get a nice bold color and usually pretty good opacity. And you can see when I start doing the project, that is totally true, as well as in these little swatches right here. So my pen coverage is actually like covering over the ink on the swatch book. And these type of markers sit on top of the paper rather than soaking in. So they layer over darker colors without completely disappearing, which is super nice, and vice versa, by the way. Now the trade-off is that depending on the formulation, acrylic inks can sometimes be a little streaky if you're not careful, and they might also take longer to dry than alcohol or water-based inks. And I have seen people share their artwork that is gorgeous, but the ones that are doing especially larger faces that are using skin tones especially, you can see where the streakiness appears, which is completely to be expected when you're using more of a little pen to cover up a really large space. And then if we compare those to the Posca pens, which we talked about at the beginning, the two are actually quite similar, as we know, since the Posca pens are also water-based acrylic paint pens. Where Posca's tend to shine, though, is in their reliability. The pigments are super opaque. They cover really well, even on dark paper, and they're known for being highly light fast. That means if you put your art in a sunny room or under a bright light for a long time, it won't fade nearly as quickly. Poscas also have a really good reputation for archival quality. Artists who sell their work often prefer them because this color holds up over time really well, which is why you will often see this is like the go-to for actual fine artists who display their work in galleries and sell them professionally. Now, let's contrast both of those with the Faber-Castell Pitt Pens, which I also showed you in the beginning, and I have lots of reviews on this channel. These are India ink markers, so they're pigment-based and not acrylic ink-based. They are waterproof once dry, as are the other two, and they are also marketed as highly light fast. The big difference is that Pitt pens are more like traditional drawing pens than paint pens. They're designed to soak into the paper a little more, which gives you smoother coverage for line work, but less of that thick paint-like surface that you get with acrylic markers. In terms of opacity, Pitt pens don't usually cover darker colors very well, but they're fantastic for sketching and outlines and illustration work. But if you try to cover them like over bold backgrounds, they don't always show up as strongly as a Posca or an Artex. That being said, the way that I use Pitt pens is very unique, and I will be talking through that as I test these Arrtx markers out in today's demo, because I really wanted to test and see if I could use them in the same way that I use Pitt pens, and that is how I use them over sealer. So I actually use them while the ink is wet and not in the traditional way that most people use Pitt pens when they are using them on a dry surface. So if light fastness and archival quality are your biggest concerns, Pitt pens and Poscas both have an edge because their pigments are tested for that. And Artex is it's more of a budget brand. It doesn't publish as much information on fade resistance, so you may not want to rely on them for professional pieces you're planning to sell or hang in direct sunlight. They just haven't been around long enough to be tested as thoroughly. But for sketchbooks and crafts and for fun mixed media projects, heck yes, they're super fun. They're really bold, they're colorful, and they really do get the job done, and especially if you're working on lighter paper, but even on darker paper, they work really well. To sum it up, while you're watching me get this party started, the Arrtx are affordable, they're acrylic paint pen, they are decent opacity, they're fun for casual work, but light fastness is definitely a question mark. Posca pens are reliable, they are super opaque, they are archival quality acrylic paint, and they are awesome for serious projects. And the Pitt pens, which we'll talk about more on the second project I'm going to show you, are pigment-based India ink markers. They are light fast and archival, but they're less opaque for layering. Better for line art and illustration, but again, I'm going to show you exactly how I use them and how I'm going to see if Arrtx markers will be able to be used in the same way. So you can see already. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, you can grab the references and the supply list to all the things that I'm going to be using in today's video over on my YouTube Neat Suite, and your $6 contribution really helps me to stay afloat and keep publishing these videos for free every week on YouTube, my version of Patreon, if you will. So huge thanks if you want to opt in for that. And in there, my Neat Suite too, you can also find all 650 plus of my YouTube videos, plus all 39 of my cheat sheets that people basically chase me around the internet to collect, but they're all in there for you. So my first big test, other than checking out the opacity and seeing how they layer, and one color does sit right on top of another, so that is delightful. Plus you have that lovely, juicy, soft, beautiful, smooth nib that you can also use for coloring. So super enjoyed it for this project. And you might have noticed I just used a wet watercolor brush to actually, while the ink was still wet, add water, and I was actually able to move quite a lot of it around. I was very excited about the possibility, and that is when it hit me that I really wanted to test to see if I could use these in the same way that I like to use Pitt pens, which I mentioned before. I use over a sealer, and I'm going to be testing that too, but that was very exciting. I was like, oh, this could be way more than just a lovely, fun marker. And make no mistake, you guys, this marker, because of the ink inside, they really are quite unique because they have that special combination of a much better, in my opinion, nib than the Poscas. much more artsy and illustrative mark is able to be put down. So if like my sketching looks the way it looks because of those nibs, that's all the magic of the nibs. So I'm really loving these, and I love all the 90 colors. There aren't any browns. I think there's only one brown, so it doesn't have a huge spectrum. I thought it could have had an even larger spectrum. To be honest, I felt like there was that color family was missing. However, that being said, the fact that it had as many skin tones as it did, like it was like 15 choices, is awesome. But I think they definitely are lacking in we need more browns, especially that way, because without the browns, we also can't do a lot of the skin tones as well. So I felt like that was a little bit lacking in that department. But what they lacked in color selection, they definitely made up for with the fun. So I will let it slide. I will also be reaching for these, I think, more and more. It was in some regards, oh, there I am also testing the permanence. So I hadn't quite tested that yet. So when I was doing her hair, I was adding a lot of water and able to get that ink to move. But make no mistake, after the ink has dried, you miss your window and those suckers are locked in. So it was nice to be able to test the permanence, and they really are locked in. They really are permanent when dry. But cool to know you do have a little teeny sneaky window that if you get it when they're wet, you can move them. And I'm gonna do way more on that in about 2 seconds. And I'm gonna end up doing the background using this actual technique. And that was really fun. You have a split second. You gotta move. You can't wait. You can't wait for it to dry, because once it dries, you're locked out. But it was really fun. I also wanted to test in this experiment today what other art supplies I could use with them. So this is a water-based micro brush sign pen by Pentel. I have a whole review on this. This is my secret weapon. I use this for so many different things: fine hairs, shoelaces, ribbons, like all of my illustrative work. I incorporate these pens. So I was like, I'm gonna need to test these suckers and see if they're gonna paint over, and they do, which is nice. Sometimes you can have there's some like wax resist or something, so you don't really know until you test. That's why I say when in doubt, always test it out. So that was nice. I also will be testing color pencils. I was reading someone in my Facebook group comment that they were using color pencils over them and they weren't adhering. They were having issues. So I was really excited to get to that part of this illustration where I could test that out as well. But that'll be a second, because first I'm having a time of my life. So we just have to wait a minute till I'm done playing, because it's so fun. It's so fun. All right, here's the color pencil test as promised. So at first I wanted to put white over dark and see how that worked. And actually, I didn't have any problems with it. I was expecting it would be weird based on the comment, like I said, in the Facebook group that I had read. So I was expecting it to not work so well, but actually I found it was fine. Oh, I'm so sorry about my shoddy camera work. So I decided to whip out my Inktense and just have a little go. The Prismacolor was fine. Inktense was super fun. It layered on top, no problem. And then you can also activate that and wet it. Now, when your acrylic ink dries and you do put a water-soluble something on top of it, just know it's not going to blend in with your paints, because you basically have created like a wet barrier that's not going to penetrate through. So I don't end up using water on them, but that's how normally people like to activate the Inktense markers, and then they are permanent when dry, but you can also use them dry just like color pencils. So I'm going back to my Prismacolor here, and just to make sure my test wasn't really off, also tried the white. And like I said, yeah, it was fine. I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't feel that it resisted me too much. And in fact, because the markers lay down so smoothly when you put the I'm having a brain fart. When you put the pencils on top of them, it also goes on very smooth as well. So you don't get the texture, is what I'm trying to say really badly. All right, this is where I had a really fun time, which was making a little wet squeegee pile, and then as quick as I could, grabbing a wet paintbrush and seeing if I could spread the ink. And I totally could. I was like, oh, this is awesome. we're really moving and grooving. So this is like where the fun comes with mixed media artists, right? Like it's pushing all those boundaries and like seeing what damage we can cause. So that was like, okay, obviously I put down so much and it moved so well. So let's do it on the other corner. Now you can see on the left-hand side, it does stain because it really does want to dry really quickly. Like you got to move fast, but look what happens when you do move fast. That's like a watercolor effect. That's awesome. So if you can plan for it and you can move quickly, you can for sure have some really fun smeary effects with this, but you got to move fast. Also make sure that while that paper is wet, you don't do what I do, which is don't put your marker into any part wet that's on your paper. You will trash your markers over time. Another thing you could try, yeah, don't do that. I really wanted to put these to the test though. You got to really test them as much as you can. It's not a good practice though to put a dry marker into wet. I don't recommend it, but I really wanted to see how far I could move these suckers. Plus I was really enjoying the effect. I usually call this my kindergarten background when I just do like big swirly swooshes in the background. It's actually one of my favorite ways to do backgrounds. I just find it very like freeing and a way to let go, and I just fill in all the white spaces with these little swirlies. It's so pretty. I'm not sorry about my kindergarten background. I love it so much. So again, you'll notice the staining for the parts that don't move. So it's just something to be aware of, but it's not really a deal breaker. And what I'm gonna end up doing to fix it, especially on the piece you'll see next, I do after this one, is just I will simply add another layer of dry on top, and then it covers up the kind of ugly, like half activated. Now look at that on the right. I waited too long and it didn't move, and I'm like, oh shoot. So yeah, it's very freeing though, and I was really excited that like I got super into it after this part. So yeah, experiment with that and give it a try. I think it would be neat. It would be neat to do a girl's face and put the color around either side, or even just do like cheeks and then just put water around her cheeks to make them dissolve. This opens up a whole nother like line of possibility of things that you could try in different ways that you can fill in color without using it more almost like a Tombow marker, but a race. It's a race. Make no mistake, it is a race, but fun. It's super fun. And you do have the permanence option after it dries as well. So you can layer them and you're not going to reactivate any of the layers underneath, which is how they're so different from a Tombow marker or a water soluble marker. So that permanence is pretty cool. So I was so pleasantly surprised by this maneuver. All right, so the next project I'm going to be showing you is actually my full-blown like hamburger method. This is how I teach tons of projects to my Mixed Media Society members. I've published a book on this. I've published many tutorials on this on YouTube. And so I'm going to be following my exact hamburger process. And then in doing so, I'm going to be using that. Look how cute she came out. I was so excited. It's adorable. And then in doing so, I was able to try them out as I use the Pitt pen. I'm going to show up on my screen what the hamburger method actually is, and that will help you to get the overall view of this. But basically the first part is collage. Now you can skip this step for sure if you don't love collage. I love the texture and I just honestly love it. It's like my warm up. It gets me like mentally prepared for my creative session. I love the bumpy texture underneath. It's so like sneaky and sly and adds so much interest. So I really enjoy starting collage, but you can totally skip collage and go right to the second layer, which is acrylics, which you'll see in the next move after I get all my collage pieces down. And again, I will have this cheat sheet, my hamburger cheat sheet, plus 38 other cheat sheets, plus the references for today, plus this video, plus 649 other videos in my neat suite, and I'll drop a link for you. Also, my YouTube watchers get a 50% off forever coupon, and I'll definitely link that up for you. But you can absolutely watch. I'm not skipping any parts of this, so I'm happy to reveal the whole thing right to you right now. So fun. So I love to use matte medium as my little adherence quality, aka glue, for paper. I like matte gel for thicker things, but I like matte medium for paper. All right, so we're gonna put down our textured bottom. Get it all down there. And then after that one is added, we're going to make sure this is all dry with a hairdryer. So take a hairdryer. Don't wait. Just take a hairdryer and nuke that sucker. No, don't nuke it. But dry it. Get all your bubbles and your wrinkles out by pressing down with your finger. Dry it, and then you can go on to the next layer. So the next layer of the hamburger is gesso and acrylics. You don't always need gesso, but today I do want it because I want to knock back that background so it's a much more faint and it's not like taking over center stage. I want the markers to be center stage and the colors and the girl, of course. So cute. Just wiping off some back so that it fades a little bit more quickly towards the edges. I really like dark edges, and then I like a more like glowy center. So I was just putting another little layer of gesso in the middle. Putting the cap back on, and then we're gonna dry that. All right, now normally I would use just acrylic paint right now. And the reason I use acrylic paints, this layer has to be permanent, because whatever you don't want to move, I should say, needs to be permanent here, because we're gonna be sealing this with a wet brush on sealer, which will move anything that's not permanent when you go to add the sealer. Oh, look at, I was too late. So I wasn't too late on that first side section, but I was on the other section. So yeah, I was really messing around with here. Look how, when I did it so fast at the bottom, it completely dissolved all the way. And I didn't have any kind of ghosting. And then on the right hand side, you can see I was like a little bit late, and then the left hand side, it was all the way late. So I'm putting another layer over on top and then trying to move that. Okay, that's really cool. That's a really cool feature. And because they're so juicy when you lay them down, you really can get that moving. If this was a Posca pen, it wouldn't work because it doesn't like output enough ink for you to move. Unless you're using like a huge broad nibbed one, it wouldn't even work. So I'm using the middle, you can see that little middle image there on the right as my inspiration. So adding those little pops of blue in the same places that I see them on my reference. Love it. So fun. So yeah, this is totally gonna be a thing. It's also really fast. It's a lot faster than painting. And especially when you're trying to do really subtle effects like this, that's actually hard to do with a big wad of acrylic paint and a paintbrush. So this made it actually easier, which I thought was really cool. So that layer also needs to be dried. The next layer in the Hamburger System is you can either use permanent materials for details here, or you can use water soluble ones. And also my drawing is crap here, so I was doing with it really fast. I just wanted to get to the like testing part, so I was flying when I was doing the illustration. So that is a permanent gel pen. Most gel pens are not permanent, so if you're following me, make sure your pen is water permanent and not water soluble. Yeah, that's super important, so heads up there. But I knew it wasn't going to move, so that's why I was doing with it. And I was really trying to capture the same look as my reference, which is why I was using a pen and not something like I would normally use, which is like a Stabilo wall. And then people use the Stabilo wall, and then we do the sealer, and then they hate me because it smears. But I love the smear. So you just have to know that about yourself. Do you love a smear or do you not love a smear? If you love a smear, when I use Stabilo, you can follow me. And if you don't, you can follow this video where I'm using a permanent gel pen that I know is not going to move when I use the sealer. All right, so my whole thing with the Pitt pens is using them after I seal. And there's a little window of time where Pitt pens, again, I haven't sealed yet, but you'll see I will. There's the one and only brown pretty much that we have in the whole set. The Pitt pens have a 20-second window. So the window for these pens is like 2 seconds. The window for a Pitt pen is like 20 seconds. And you can use your finger to really add awesome like shading on all of your places. If you don't want to learn how to blend acrylic paints, you don't even have to. That's why I teach my hamburger method, because you don't need any painting skills in order to blend or get the look of blending. When you're not blending at all, you're doing all of it with a Pitt pen. It's like a super hack, and it's my favorite, and it's super fun. Plus you have the details that you can use too, because you have the thin applicators. It was picking up, this was weird because it was picking up my gel pen, but you'll see when I add the sealer, it doesn't really move. So I think maybe that ink just hadn't dried all the way is what happened there. So loving loving these pens. Just to be clear, if I had not covered that part yet, I actually love them. I still wouldn't do any face bigger than this. You can tell how streaky this face is, and sure, that face is pretty small. It's only 3 inches. And I actually end up doing quite a number of coats to get rid of that. So I would save these for more illustrative details, but they would be awesome in combination with a large portrait for sure. But then use these for like earrings or lips or eyes or hair accessories or jewelry or like literally anything. I would use them for anything except for the big areas. You can see it's quite streaky and a little bit yucky, but I wanted to see too, could I blend her cheek? Well, let's push the boundaries here. And they do layer opaquely, but not as much as I needed them to, which is why I kept having to layer them over and over again. So they weren't the worst, but this is where I think Posca shines. I think Posca is a little bit more opaque than these ones are, but I would use them in different ways. So it's fine. Like you can have both and get a huge use out of both of them. All right, so I am going to be using that sealer really quickly. I was just getting in love with that background. I was like obsessed with it. It was like perfect. It was so fun and freeing, and having 90 colors to choose from was really satisfying, and I had so much fun. So once you get all of the acrylic part done when you're using the hamburger method, you're gonna make sure it's all dry. You're gonna have braced yourself for anything to smear. That was water soluble, but that's cool. You knew it was gonna happen because I told you 50 times. And then afterwards, yeah, see, I was still not happy with her face. Then we're gonna add the sealer layer. And I literally coat the entire thing with Mod Podge. You can also use matte medium. You can actually use any acrylic medium. I'm stuck on Mod Podge. I've been using it for 20 years and I can't break my habit. And people are like, doesn't it yellow over time? And I'm like, no, I have pieces that are in my attic that are like, have been up there for 10 years and they're totally fine. So maybe they do, but so far so good. I love my project, my product, but you can love yours as well. All right, here we go. There's I literally, as you can see, I'm not dainty about it. I literally just pour it over my projects. I love it because it dries super fast, but matte medium would dry that fast as well. And then this is where I always go in with my Pitt pens. Now I've also tested Staedtler's new pigment pens, which also work really well. I would say equally as well. Just know if you're using Staedtler and you use the matte medium, they do smear apparently. I have a student who told me that's what happened. I don't use it, so they don't smear with the Mod Podge. So I didn't know that. So be forewarned. Okay, so this was my big test to see if they would work the same way that I work with Pitt pens, whereas I scribble some on and then I'm able to blend it a ton. And I'm sad to say it did not work. It didn't work. The ink was too thick. That was crazy. That was the only one I did get to move, but it was in a bad way. The upside is because it's acrylic ink, you can actually just color over it in the original color. So the window for movement is so short. It was, again, 2 seconds versus Pitt Pen's 20 seconds, which made a world of difference and not in a good way. Unfortunately, I can't say that these are gonna be an alternative for Pitt pens, which stinks, I know, because they're way cheaper. And I would have loved for that to have worked, especially for all my mixed media students who do all of my hamburgers with me. At this point too, I was wishing that this nib was a little bit smaller. Oh, this was another good test. So another thing that I can do with the Pitt pen over the sealer layer is that they erases. All I need to do is take I'll literally lick my finger and wipe it off, but you can't do that with these. I was scrubbing with a magic eraser right there. I scrubbed it for 60 seconds and then it finally came off. So these suckers are permanent and they really don't move. But that's not a bad thing. It's just not how I use them in the hamburger, which is fine. Again, I was wishing I had a smaller nib. I really got caught up and I wanted to like illustrate with them all day long, and it was a little too thick for this whole situation, but I was having so much fun, and the whole point was to test it. It wasn't to make any insane masterpiece that was gonna be in any gallery or anything. But yeah, super interesting product. Again, me personally, I'm gonna use them definitely with my Hamburger System in the lower layers, but you can also use them for permanent things on top, they work really well over the Mod Podge, which is awesome. So under or over your sealer layer is always great to have options, because I don't like using my Pitt pens under. I can, but they're really expensive, so I like to save them for only like crucial details, and I don't like to waste them on anything other. So I would use these instead under your sealer layer. You can, if you work really fast, you can get those watercolor effects, which is super cool. And at their price point, like, it's not a big deal. You can keep going. So I've thoroughly enjoyed working with them. I'll have links to everything, like I said, below in the description box, and another link to my Neat Suite. It's a super fun place to hang. It's literally $6 and you get access to absolutely everything. I update it 4 times a month, so it is a monthly fee if you want to stay. But pretty much every single week I publish a new YouTube video, and in every video I usually use references and I have my supplies listed. So it's really a nice place. You can one click just get everything. Oh yeah, last but not least, I needed to test the white, right? The white is probably the most important color of any marker set. It's got to be opaque or it's no good to me. So I was making sure to test it over everything, over the other fresh lines that I had. It's not 100% opaque. I would say it's probably like 85%. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not a Posca pen. I think Posca wins in this department. Even it's probably the same as a Pitt pen if you are familiar with those. So it's like pretty dang good, but it's not the best. I think I would still use my Copic white, or a Posca pen would be more opaque than this one. So I hope that you got a lot out of this review. I will be back next Wednesday with another fun video to watch. And if you want to check out my full review on the Faber-Castell Pitt pens and the Staedtler ones, I'll pop them up here on the screen and you can go watch those next. Thanks.